All right, welcome. This video is all about single variable statistics. It's our review. Single variable statistics review. This is all topics that were covered for most people in 6th grade math. Now, when we are talking about a single variable statistics, we are looking at measures of center, measures of shape, and measures of spread. These are the things you have to cover if you're asked to describe a distribution or describe what's happening with a certain statistic. So measures of center, that's talking about like the average, like what's the middle, what's the typical, and the mathematical measures that we use for that are usually mean and median. Mode is often listed in that same, along with the other two. It's very rare that mode is the best measure of center though. So for our purposes, I want us mostly to focus on mean and median. I guess we can put mode down. There's tons of other measures of center. You can look it up on Wikipedia if you want. There's all sorts of crazy ways that when you're doing more advanced statistics, you can find the center of the data set. Then there's the shape. So that's all about what does the graph look like. So often that means, is it symmetrical? Is it skewed? Does it have any gaps? This is all vocabulary that hopefully is ringing bells and sounds familiar. And then finally, we're interested in measures of spread. So that is how spread out is the data. How much variability is there? Variability. How much variability is there? And we have lots of ways we can evaluate that as well. The most basic of which is range, right? If I ask you how spread out is the data, you might just say, well, the smallest number is this, the biggest number is that, subtract, that's the range, that is the measure of spread, most basic one. You also, in 6th grade, learned how to find the IQR and the MAD, mean absolute deviation. IQR stands for inner quartile range. And in 8th grade, you're going to learn a new measure of spread called standard deviation. We'll add it to our notes now so that our notes are complete and so that you see where it fits in with everything else. Standard deviation. All right, so let's do a few examples. Okay, so I'm going to give you a dot plot. This is the number of hours of sleep that some middle schoolers got. And I want you to describe the distribution of the data set. So remember, there's 3 things we need to be describing. We need to describe the center. We need to describe the shape. And we need to describe the spread. Now, we don't need to find all the measures for all of those, right? We can just pick one for each. So if I want to find the center of the data set, that means I need to decide, am I going to do mean or median? For this one, let's go ahead and do mean. We're going to talk later about I guess we could talk about it now. Like in this case, this is a pretty symmetrical data set, right? It's not too skewed. This 5 is maybe a little bit pulled off to the side, but for the most part, it's pretty symmetrical. And whenever it's a relatively symmetrical data set, the mean is usually the better measure of center. So to find the mean, I just need to add up all the numbers. So I've written them out here. I've got a 5, 6, 3 7s, 3 8s, 2 9s, and that gives me a total of 74. And then of course, when I'm finding the mean, I need to take that and I need to divide it by how many numbers there were. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I divide by 10. And 74 divided by 10 gives me 7.4 is the mean. The mean is the middle of the data. I can look and see Why did I write 7.5? That's not what I said. 7.4. 7.4. So the mean looks like it's about right there. Does that look like about the center of the data? Looks pretty good to me. All right, so now I need to describe the shape. So I actually sort of already did that. I said that this is roughly symmetrical because it's not really particularly skewed either way. It has no outliers because nothing is like way too far off in any direction. No gaps. And there is a peak at 7 and 8. Okay, so hopefully that's reminding you of things you've learned in the past, that that's how we are describing what's happening in the data set. All right, now for the spread, I could use the range, the IQR, or the MAD. Those are the ones we know how to do right now. IQR only makes sense if you're using median. Median belongs with IQR. We didn't use median, so we're not going to do that. Mean belongs with the MAD or with range. Range works with both. Let's do range for this one. So we remember range is subtracting the largest value from the smallest. So that would be 9 minus 5. I may have said that backwards. Subtracting the smallest value from the largest value gives me 4. So my range is 4. Now to finish this off, I'm going to continue that description I made of the shape, and I'm just going to include my measure of center and my measure of spread. So I finished off my description by saying that the average using the mean hours of sleep is 7.4 and the range is 4. The idea is that you've written a sentence or two that if I didn't see the graph and I didn't know anything else about it, would give me a pretty good sense of what this data set looks like. All right, now it's your turn. I want you to describe the distribution of this data set. So remember, you need at least one measure of center, you need to describe the shape, and you need at least one measure of spread. Write your final answer as a couple sentences and be sure to show any math that you do. Pause, do this now, and then watch and see how I do it. All right, so I decided to use the median for my measure of center because I can't actually find any other center. Like, it's impossible to find the mean for this because I don't have all the individual data points. And for the spread, I'm going to use the IQR mostly as an excuse to review it with you, make sure we remember what it means. All right, so the median is bloop, that one right there. The middle line in a box plot is the median. So the median is 6. And the IQR, that is the distance from the first quartile to the third quartile. That distance right there. So in this case, it's from 5 to 10. So the IQR is 10 minus 5 equals 5 because the width of this box here is 5. Okay, so, and then I need to describe the shape. So describing shape's a little bit trickier on a box plot, but it's totally still possible. So I can't tell if there's like gaps. I can see that there's no outliers because if there were, they would have done like a little star off to the side where the outlier was rather than extending the box and whisker. Usually, not always, but usually. So I'm going to say that the data set has no outliers and it looks like it's a bit skewed to the right. I can tell that because this part right here is really tiny, but remember each section of this is 25% of the data. So this means that 25% of the data is all clumped in there. So if I were to picture this drawn out, it would have like a little peak right here. Would have a little peak right here, and then it kind of goes out over there, and then on this side it goes down over here. Right, so like that's the ends there. You can see the ends, and then we can see that like a lot of it kind of goes right here. Actually, maybe more like something like that is what that looks to me like it might be. So I'm going to say it's slightly right skewed, and it has I'm going to call it a cluster from 5 to 6. It's hard to tell if it's a cluster or not from a box plot. It might actually just be a peak. Hard to tell. And then, of course, I want to include my center and my spread here. So I'm going to say the median of the data set. Median of the data set is 6, and the IQR is 5. All right, so for your practice problem, you're going to describe the distribution of this data set. Notice I did not give you a graph this time, so you are going to need to make a graph. You can do a dot plot, you can do a box plot, you can do a histogram. If you don't really remember how to do any of them, I highly recommend you do a dot plot, because those ones are pretty straightforward, and you can just look back at the first graph that I gave you as an example of how to do that. So this is the total number of hours per week spent doing homework for 13 8th graders. Remember to describe the center, shape, and spread of the data set. Good luck.